It was supposed to be a relaxing evening, one of those nights where the ocean's rhythmic whispers lulled every worry into a gentle stupor. I had driven down to Clearwater Beach after a particularly grueling week. My mind was buzzing with stress, and the thought of sand between my toes and the endless expanse of the night sky above the sea felt like the perfect antidote. The drive was uneventful, but as I turned off the main road onto the narrow path that led to the quieter side of the beach, a spot I discovered by accident years ago, something felt off. The night was darker than usual, the moon obscured by thick, low-hanging clouds. There were hardly any cars parked by the dunes, which I found odd because this spot, while secluded, often attracted night wanderers like me. I parked my car, grabbed my flashlight, and stepped out. The air was salty and cool, with a faint breeze that carried the sound of crashing waves. The sand crunched softly beneath my sneakers as I made my way down to the water. I didn't bother turning on the flashlight yet. I knew this path well enough to navigate by the faint glow of distant streetlights and the ambient light from the nearby pier. A single thought struck me as I walked. It was too quiet. No faint laughter of couples. No music from someone's portable speaker. Not even the occasional sound of a far-off car. Just the waves and my own breathing. I found a spot near the water's edge and sat down, pulling my hoodie tighter against the chill. The tide was low, revealing jagged rocks that weren't usually visible during the day. I let my mind drift, staring out at the horizon, where the sea melded into the darkness. Minutes passed, maybe an hour. Time felt slippery out here. I could hear the waves crash and retreat, and I felt myself beginning to relax. That's when I saw him. At first, it was just a silhouette, standing motionless about 50 feet down the shore. He was close to the water, too close, his figure barely illuminated by the faint glow of the pier lights far in the distance. My first thought was that it was just another night wanderer like me, someone who came to the beach seeking solitude. But there was something unsettling about the way he stood, rigid, as though he was a part of the landscape. His posture was unnatural, stiff, almost like a mannequin. I told myself to ignore him. People have their quirks, and maybe he was just lost in his own world. I turned my gaze back to the ocean, but I couldn't shake the feeling that I was being watched. Against my better judgment, I glanced back in his direction. He hadn't moved, or had he? It was hard to tell from this distance, but it felt like he was slightly closer to me than before. My pulse quickened. "You're being paranoid?" I muttered under my breath. The sound of my own voice was oddly comforting, even though it didn't completely drown out the unease crawling up my spine. I forced myself to look away, focusing on the waves again. But then I heard it, the crunch of footsteps on the sand. Slow, deliberate. My heart pounded in my chest as I turned my head sharply toward the sound. He was walking toward me now, his pace unhurried but purposeful. The closer he got, the more details I could make out. He was tall, wearing what looked like a dark jacket and jeans. His face was still obscured by the shadows, but something about his gait, steady, unrelenting, made my stomach churn. I stood up instinctively, brushing the sand off my jeans. My flashlight was still in my pocket, and I fumbled to get it out. The beam wobbled as I turned it on, illuminating the sand between us. He stopped, just outside the range of the light, as if he didn't want to be seen. "Hey!" I called out, trying to keep my voice steady. "Do you need something?" No response. He just stood there, staring. Or at least I assumed he was staring. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them. The air between us felt heavy, oppressive. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. "If you're trying to freak me out, it's working," I said, trying to inject some bravado into my voice. "I'm just here to relax, man. Leave me alone." Still nothing. Then, without warning, he took another step toward me, and another. My flight response kicked in. I turned and started walking briskly back toward the parking lot. I didn't want to run, not yet. Running felt like it would confirm to him that I was afraid, and I didn't want to give him that satisfaction. But as I glanced over my shoulder, I saw him following me, his pace matching mine. I broke into a jog. The soft sand made it harder to move quickly, and I cursed under my breath as my foot sank with every step. The flashlight beam bounced erratically, casting fleeting shadows that only heightened my anxiety. I glanced back again. He was running now, closing the distance between us with alarming speed. Panic overtook me. I sprinted toward the dunes, my lungs burning as I pushed myself to go faster. The parking lot wasn't far. If I could just reach my car, I'd be safe. The thought of those locked doors and the engine roaring to life was the only thing keeping me from collapsing in fear. I tripped. My foot caught on a piece of driftwood, and I went down hard, the impact knocking the wind out of me. The flashlight flew from my hand, landing a few feet away. I scrambled to get up, but before I could, I felt a hand grip my ankle. "No!" I screamed, kicking out with my free leg. My sneaker connected with something solid, and the grip loosened. I didn't waste a second. I crawled toward the flashlight, grabbing it and shining it directly at him. For the first time, I got a good look at his face. It was blank. Not in the literal sense, but his expression was devoid of any emotion. His eyes were dark, unblinking, his mouth a thin line. There was no rage, no malice, just an eerie calm that made him even more terrifying. I swung the flashlight at him, the metal casing connecting with his shoulder. He grunted, staggering back just enough for me to get to my feet. I ran again, my legs screaming in protest. This time, I didn't look back. The parking lot was in sight now, the faint glow of the streetlights a beacon of hope. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as I heard his footsteps behind me. My hands were shaking so badly that I dropped the keys. "Come on! Come on!" I muttered, picking them up and finally unlocking the door. I threw myself inside, locking the doors just as he reached the car. He slammed his hands against the driver's side window, his face inches from the glass. I screamed, starting the engine and throwing the car into reverse. The tires spun in the sand for a moment before finding traction, and I sped backward, narrowly missing a wooden post. As I turned onto the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He was standing there, motionless again, watching me drive away. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station miles away. I parked under the bright lights, my hands still trembling as I tried to process what had just happened. Who was he? What did he want? I had no answers, only the lingering terror of those dark, unblinking eyes. I reported the incident to the local authorities the next day, giving them as much detail as I could. They said they'd patrol the area but didn't seem particularly hopeful about catching him. Weeks passed, and I avoided the beach entirely. I thought about him often, about how close I'd come to what I didn't even want to imagine. Then one day I saw a news report. A man matching his description had been arrested after attacking someone on another secluded beach a few towns over. The victim had managed to fight him off and escape, leading to his capture. I felt a strange mix of relief and dread as I watched his mugshot flash on the screen. It was him, the same blank face, the same dark eyes. He'd been caught, but the memory of that night still lingered, a scar etched into my mind. I hadn't just imagined the danger. It had been real, and I'd narrowly escaped becoming another headline. Since then, I've never gone back to the beach at night. The ocean's whispers no longer soothe me. Instead, they remind me of the footsteps in the sand, of the man who followed me, and of the fear that I'll never completely outrun. The night felt like an escape waiting to happen, a chance to leave behind the monotony and stress of daily life. I wasn't planning anything extraordinary, just a quiet evening by the sea to clear my head. Clearwater Beach had always been my sanctuary, a place where the waves carried away my worries. This time, however, I chose a more secluded spot, a part of the beach few people knew about. That decision, I now realize, changed everything. The drive to the beach was uneventful, the roads deserted under the faint glow of streetlights. I turned off onto the narrow dirt path leading to my secret spot, my car's headlights cutting through the dense foliage on either side. As I parked near the dunes, an eerie sensation crept over me. The night seemed unnaturally still, the usual chirping of crickets absent, as if the world were holding its breath. Grabbing my flashlight, I stepped out of the car. The air was heavy with the scent of salt and seaweed, and the faint sound of waves lapping at the shore was the only noise. I walked toward the water, the sand cool beneath my sneakers. I didn't turn on the flashlight. The dim light from the distant pier was enough to guide me. The beach was empty, or so it seemed. That's what I told myself as I made my way to the shoreline. I found a spot near the water's edge and sat down, letting the rhythm of the waves wash over me. The ocean stretched out like an endless abyss, the horizon blending into the starless sky. For a while, I felt a sense of peace. The stress that had clung to me all week began to dissolve. But then, I noticed him. At first, it was just a shadow, barely visible against the dark backdrop of the sea. He stood motionless, about 50 feet away, close to the water. I squinted, trying to make out more details, but the distance and lack of light made it difficult. My initial thought was that he was just another night wanderer, someone seeking solace in the same way I was. Yet, there was something unsettling about his stillness. He didn't move, didn't shift his weight, didn't even seem to breathe. I tried to ignore him, focusing instead on the waves. But the sensation of being watched grew stronger. Against my better judgment, I glanced back. He was still there, but now he seemed closer, as if he had edged forward without me noticing. My heart began to race, and a chill ran down my spine. I told myself it was just my imagination, that the shadows were playing tricks on me. Still, I couldn't shake the unease. "It's nothing," I muttered under my breath, the sound of my own voice oddly comforting. But when I looked again, he was closer. Not walking, not running, just closer. It didn't make sense. I hadn't heard any footsteps, no crunch of sand. Yet there he was, his figure more defined now. He was tall, dressed in dark clothing, his face obscured by the shadows. I stood up, the sense of peace I'd felt earlier now completely replaced by dread. My flashlight was still in my pocket, and I pulled it out, flicking it on. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the sand in front of me. But the man stood just outside its reach, as if deliberately avoiding the light. "Hey!" I called out, my voice firmer than I felt. "Do you need something?" He didn't respond. He just stood there, unmoving, watching. Or at least I thought he was watching. I couldn't see his eyes, but I could feel them on me. The silence was oppressive, the kind that makes your ears ring. I took a step back, the flashlight trembling in my hand. "If you're trying to scare me, it's not funny," I said, though my voice betrayed my fear. Still, he didn't move, didn't speak. The tension was unbearable, and my instincts screamed at me to leave. I turned and began walking back toward the parking lot, my pace quickening with each step. The sound of footsteps in the sand made me freeze. They were slow, deliberate, matching my movements. I turned the flashlight toward the noise, but it revealed nothing. When I glanced over my shoulder, he was there, closer than before. My heart pounded, and I broke into a jog, the soft sand making every step a struggle. The beam of my flashlight bounced wildly, casting erratic shadows that only heightened my fear. Then I heard it, the unmistakable sound of running. I didn't need to look back to know he was chasing me. Panic surged through me, and I sprinted toward the dunes, my lungs burning with the effort. The parking lot wasn't far now. If I could just reach my car, I'd be safe. My foot caught on something, and I went down hard, the flashlight flying out of my hand. Pain shot through my ankle as I scrambled to get up, but before I could, I felt a hand wrap around it. "No!" I screamed, kicking out with my free leg. My foot connected with his arm, and the grip loosened. I crawled toward the flashlight, grabbing it and shining it at him. For the first time, I saw his face. It was blank, devoid of emotion, his eyes dark and unblinking. There was no anger, no malice, just a chilling emptiness that was somehow worse. I swung the flashlight at him, the metal casing striking his shoulder. He grunted, staggering back just enough for me to get to my feet. I ran, the pain in my ankle forgotten as adrenaline took over. The parking lot was in sight, the faint glow of the streetlights a beacon of hope. I reached my car, fumbling with the keys as his footsteps grew louder behind me. My hands shook so badly that I dropped the keys. "Come on," I whispered, picking them up and finally unlocking the door. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and locking it just as he reached the car. He pounded on the window, his face inches from the glass. I screamed, starting the engine and throwing the car into reverse. The tires spun in the sand before finding traction, and I sped backward, narrowly avoiding a wooden post. As I turned onto the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He stood there, motionless once again, watching me drive away. The sight of him, framed by the darkness, was burned into my memory. I didn't stop driving until I reached a gas station miles away. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I tried to calm my racing heart, but the terror lingered. I reported the incident to the police the next day, describing everything in as much detail as I could. They promised to investigate but didn't seem optimistic about finding him. Weeks passed, and I avoided the beach entirely. Then, one evening, I saw a news report. A man matching his description had been arrested after attacking someone at another secluded beach. The victim had escaped and alerted the authorities, leading to his capture. Seeing his mugshot on the screen brought a mix of relief and lingering fear. It was him. The same blank face, the same empty eyes. He'd been caught, but the memory of that night still haunted me. I hadn't imagined the danger. It was real, and I had narrowly escaped. Since then, I've never returned to the beach at night. The ocean's whispers, once a source of comfort, now remind me of footsteps in the sand and the man who followed me. Some scars, I've learned, never fully heal. I never should have gone to the beach that night. It was an impulsive decision, a spur-of-the-moment idea to escape the monotony of my small-town life. The day had been draining, filled with arguments and the suffocating weight of responsibility. I craved solitude, the kind only the ocean could provide. Little did I know, that night would change everything. I left home just after sunset, throwing on a hoodie and grabbing my keys. The drive to Shoreline Beach was quiet, the winding roads dimly lit by the occasional street lamp. I chose a remote stretch of sand, far from the usual tourist spots. It was a place I'd stumbled upon years ago, a hidden cove surrounded by tall dunes and jagged rocks. The perfect retreat, or so I thought. As I parked my car near the edge of the dunes, I noticed how unnervingly silent the night was. The usual symphony of insects and distant waves seemed muted, as if the world were holding its breath. I grabbed my flashlight but didn't turn it on. The moon provided just enough light to navigate the uneven path toward the water. The sand felt cool beneath my sneakers as I approached the shoreline. The waves crashed softly, a soothing rhythm that began to ease the tension I'd been carrying. I found a spot close to the water and sat down, pulling my knees to my chest. The ocean stretched endlessly before me, its vastness both comforting and humbling. For a while, I simply sat there, letting the sound of the waves drown out my thoughts. But then, something caught my attention. A figure, barely visible in the distance, stood near the water's edge. At first, I thought it was a trick of the light, perhaps a shadow cast by the moon. But as I squinted, I realized it was a man. He stood motionless, facing the ocean, his silhouette stark against the shimmering water. I tried to ignore him, convincing myself he was just another person seeking solitude. Yet, there was something unsettling about his stillness. He didn't shift his weight or even seem to breathe. I glanced away, focusing instead on the waves. But the feeling of being watched was impossible to shake. When I looked back, he was closer. Not by much, but enough to make my heart skip a beat. I hadn't seen him move, hadn't heard the sand crunch beneath his feet. He was just closer. My mind raced with possibilities. Maybe he was lost. Maybe he needed help. Or maybe... I stood up, brushing the sand from my jeans. My flashlight was still in my pocket, and I gripped it tightly. "Hey!" I called out, my voice sounding braver than I felt. "Are you okay?" He didn't respond. He just stood there, his face hidden in the shadows. The waves lapped at his feet, but he didn't react. I took a step back, my instincts screaming at me to leave. "If you need something, Just say so. I tried again, my voice faltering. Still no response. The silence was deafening. I turned and began walking back toward the car, my pace quickening with each step. The flashlight felt heavy in my hand, its weight a small comfort. But then I heard it, footsteps, slow, deliberate, and far too close. I spun around, shining the flashlight toward the sound. The beam cut through the darkness, illuminating the empty beach. My breath came in short, shallow gasps as I scanned the area. Nothing. But when I turned back toward the car, he was there, standing less than 20 feet away. My heart pounded in my chest, the adrenaline surging through my veins. "What do you want?" I shouted, my voice cracking. He didn't answer. He didn't move. The beam of my flashlight trembled as I aimed it at him. His face was still obscured, but I could see his hands hanging loosely at his sides, his posture unnervingly relaxed. I took a step back, then another. He didn't follow, but his presence was enough to push me into full-blown panic. I turned and ran, the soft sand making every step feel like a struggle. The parking lot wasn't far. If I could just reach my car, I'd be safe. The sound of running behind me sent a jolt of terror through my body. He was chasing me. I didn't dare look back, focusing instead on the small patch of light ahead where my car was parked. My lungs burned, my legs screaming for relief, but I couldn't stop. I reached the car, fumbling with the keys as his footsteps grew louder. My hands shook so badly that I dropped them. "Come on! Come on!" I whispered, snatching the keys off the ground and unlocking the door. I threw myself inside, slamming the door shut and locking it just as he reached the window. He pounded on the glass, his face inches from mine. The light from the interior illuminated his features for the first time. His expression was blank, his eyes dark and unfeeling. There was no anger, no malice, just an unsettling emptiness that sent a chill down my spine. I started the engine, throwing the car into reverse. The tires spun in the sand before finding traction, and I sped backward, narrowly avoiding a wooden post. As I turned onto the main road, I glanced in the rearview mirror. He stood there, motionless once again, watching as I drove away. I didn't stop until I reached a gas station miles away. Under the harsh fluorescent lights, I tried to steady my breathing, but the terror lingered. I reported the incident to the police the next morning, providing them with every detail I could remember. They took my statement seriously but warned me that without more evidence, there wasn't much they could do. Weeks passed, and I avoided the beach entirely. Then, one night, I saw a news report. A man matching his description had been arrested after attempting to attack someone at another remote beach. The victim had managed to escape and alert the authorities, leading to his capture. Seeing his face on the screen brought a wave of relief and a shiver of lingering fear. It was him, the same blank expression, the same empty eyes. He'd been caught, but the memory of that night still haunted me. I hadn't imagined the danger. It was real, and I had narrowly escaped. Since then, I've never returned to the beach after dark. The ocean, once my refuge, now feels like a place of hidden threats. Some nights, I still hear the sound of footsteps in my dreams, chasing me through the darkness. Some fears, I've learned, never truly fade.
Hey everyone, thank you so much for supporting this channel. It truly means a lot. As a broke college student editing all my videos on an Android phone, it takes a lot of effort to bring these stories to life. A laptop would help me create better content faster, so if you enjoy my work, please subscribe and share. Your support makes all the difference. Thank you so much.